Good afternoon, everybody. I'm back at it again with a new podcast episode on preliminary treatment and how it affects us in our studies and what it is and the importance of it and everything. But before I really jump into it, I just want to say that it's been a good last few weeks and days. A couple weeks ago, had a Easter service at church, and that was a good thing for me and my family and everything. And then a couple weeks before that, or a week before that, was my birthday. Turned 41, so getting up there in age, but I'm just thankful that, each and every day God gives me the ability to do the things that I can do and grow in all those things. And one of those things is putting out podcasts that's helping people pass their exams. And I'm kind of going on this series now where I want to dive deep into like certain processes and certain types of concepts and things that, just deal with honing in on wastewater treatment instead of like a general overview. So today I'm bringing to you the preliminary treatment and before we dive in, we got to understand what is the importance of preliminary treatment and how we get to it. Well, first of all, everybody that either uses the bathroom, which everybody does, or we wash clothes, we have garbage disposals, and we wash dishes, we wash cars. Well, that would go in the storm drain, but anything that's coming from a house, a business, or an industry, that sanitary waste is going down into the collection system, into the sewer. And from there, it is, for the most part, is gravity fed systems that this sewage goes down into the gravity, goes down into the ground. And then it has to be pumped up to a different elevation because some of our treatment plants at the wastewater plant is up at a higher elevation. So this sewage is pumped up by a lift station and by pumps, and then it is carried to the wastewater treatment facility where it goes to the first process, and that first process is preliminary treatment. And at this stage, most operators underestimate this stage, and they just think it's just screens, grit, and basic stuff. But the truth is, if preliminary treatment fails, your entire plant pays for it. And so how does it pay for it? Pumps go down, lines clog, process lose efficiency, and operators end up reacting instead of controlling the process. So today we're not just talking about preliminary treatment, we're mastering it. And the new brand of podcasts and things that I have going on is H2O Hustle. It's a passion, purpose, and precision. That's my YouTube channel. I hope that you'll be able to look at it and find some good material there on water treatment and wastewater treatment. But anyway, we're talking about preliminary treatment today. And the first thing we have to recognize and realize when we're coming to preliminary treatment is that the first indication of it is screening. You have to screen things out. So just like I said, things that go down the toilet, things that go down the sink drain, or a faucet drain, or a sink, or anything that is going into the sanitary sewer, all of that stuff is coming down the pipeline to the wastewater treatment plant. And when that stuff comes down, whatever it is, organics or inorganics. We'll get to that in a little bit. But anyway, that stuff is coming down to the treatment plant, and that is the first line of defense when it comes to the process, being the very first process of wastewater treatment is preliminary treatment. So, excuse me, I had to take a drink. So, if your screens clog, then the flow backs up into the collection system, the velocity changes, and the solids carry over, which you don't want that to happen when it comes to preliminary treatment. So in preliminary treatment, the screening, they remove debris and other inorganic material to protect downstream processes, or to protect the downstream. So when it's coming into the treatment plant, it's going downstream, going through all the processes to go to the receiving stream. And to remove these debris and or inorganic material, it's accomplished by racks, screens, grinders, grit channels, and other equipment. And the proper maintenance and operation of preliminary treatment equipment is, the failure of those kind of things. So like I was getting at, when your screens fail, if they clog, the flow backs up into the collection system, which is not good. And then that'll create problems in the collection systems and homes if it's not dealt with. And all these things happen, and then your solids is not getting treated, and then it's, hydraulically overloaded, and you don't want that in the plant. So pretty much this first stage is very important when it comes to treating wastewater. And it doesn't remove. The thing about preliminary treatment is that it's to remove large solids and to protect equipment. So this equipment, grit, is made up of inorganic materials such as rocks and sand and different types of things, and eggshells, and all this stuff that don't break down, and all of that. And when we're dealing with that, if these things are not settled out in a proper way, they get clogged up in pipes and pumps, and then they can wear pumps down and wear equipment down, and then it's not being removed in a proper way. So we have that when we looking at preliminary treatment. So we have that, and then we have the how does it get removed? And like I said, it's removed by racks, screens, grinders, grit channels, and other equipment. So you got different types of racks and screens. You have, of course, a trash rack, and you have a bar screen. So a bar rack is a rack that is constructed of steel bars spaced between 2 to 6 inches apart, and they're placed at an angle from 30 degrees to 45 degree angle from the 12 o'clock position. So that's what a trash rack and a bar rack is. And it's installed to handle high volumes of large debris. So the larger things that's coming through the plant or coming to the plant to try to get through, this trash rack or bar rack is there to stop those things from coming in. So that's your bigger pieces of debris that's coming through. It's going to stop that and stop those things from coming in. And and it's usually how it's cleaned, and everything is cleaned manually. So usually somebody has to take a rake and rake off the wipes and all the heavier things to get those out of there so that it won't back up the flow into the collection system. So that's what a bar rack is. So it's usually a bigger rack, 2 to 6 inches apart, and how the steel bars are spaced. And it's usually installed in high volumes of large debris, regularly inspected and maintained, lubricated, all those types of things. Some of them are cleaned manually or automatically. I said manually at first, but some of them have some automatic, bar racks. But when I worked at a wastewater plant, when I first came into the industry, the bar rack that I had to clean was a manually one. So I had to take a rake and get a bucket and, rake those things in a bucket, and that had holes in it that can drain out, the stuff out of the bucket and, all that type of stuff. So, but yeah, we're talking about racks and screens, and that's one of the things that are there to remove different types of debris and inorganic materials. So, and then you have a bar screen, which that's next, and that is usually an automatic screen. Now, nowadays they have those that that rotate at different intervals, and these the spacings that's ranged on these bar screens are 0.75 to 2 inches, so it's a lot smaller of a space. And they have a continuous chain one, a catenary one, reciprocating rake, continuously self-cleaning ones. They have different types of bar screens, but these screens are the first line of defense when it's coming to preliminary treatment and getting those things out and all of that. So then some of the next things that's there for to learn about is grinders versus removal, but actually what a grinder is. So grinding keeps solids into the system. So it just grinds them up into smaller pieces, and then, to remove them is to take them out. But, the disadvantage of a grinder is an increased downstream load. So more stuff, more debris is still getting into the system. So it's just grinding it up. And usually when you look at a grinder of some type, it's called a comminutor or a barmanutor. And these are, big types of, looks like a rotating wheel or rotating drum with metal teeth on them. And when the debris comes through, whether it's a stick or, different type of rock or something to that effect or anything like that, it'll crush it up and grind it up so much to where it'll grind it up in a smaller piece, but it's still in the system, and it will go to the next process, in a smaller form, but that doesn't mean it has been removed. So, these grinders, they do not remove the debris, they do not reduce the load. So, and they create problems in primary clarifiers, sludge thickening units, sludge dewatering units. Use is limited, but, like I said, they go by various names: comminutors, barmanutors, a channel monster, or maybe not a channel monster, but a muffin monster. I think I've heard of muffin monster before. So that's what it is when it's coming to that, is a muffin monster and those things. So But grinders, they don't really remove anything. They just make it into smaller pieces, and it creates a heavier load on different processes and all of that. And then you got grit removal. And this is very, very important when it comes to preliminary treatment. Is the grit removal is, we have to realize that non-biodegradable particles, they settle faster than biodegradable ones. Sand, cinders, rocks, coffee grounds, filters of, cigarettes and all this other stuff. We have to realize that when we have to remove this type of grit and debris, because if we don't, like I said earlier, it will damage to the downstream equipment. So the pumps and everything that's downstream of the equipment and all the influent wastewater, if this grit is still in there, it's going to wear down these pumps and, pit these impellers and kill these impellers, and then that's just a lot more money, and it's going to clog pipes. Things like this clog pipes and clogs the flow that goes into a wastewater treatment facility. And that's the difference between wastewater and water. Water treatment, you can kind of isolate a valve. You can kind of stop flow and isolate it to a different section and still kind of get around and move around and, do the things that you can do to buy time. But in wastewater treatment, you can't necessarily stop things. And once things get clogged up and all of that, it's kind of tough to work around. But that's what you have when you have grit removal. So you have different types of things. But another thing that we got to realize is that the scouring velocity coming into the plant, coming into the collection system, is usually 2 to 8 feet per second. So you want it to be at 2.5 feet per second is like the sweet spot. So it's coming in out of the collection system at 2.5 feet per second. And then once it's coming into the wastewater facility, you want it to be slowed down to 1 feet per second, because that's the magic number for grit and inorganics and all those things to settle out. So if it's too fast, if the velocity is coming into the wastewater treatment facility too fast, the grit won't settle. And if it's too slow, then organics settle, and you don't want the organics settle. You want those treated out in the secondary treatment process, after it, primary and all of that. So we'll get to those shows later on for sure. But right now we're talking about preliminary treatment. And, that's what we're dealing with here when we deal with, these grit chambers and, all these things. And there's different types of grit chambers. There's manually ones and mechanically clean grit chambers that take out the grit, that settles it out. Aerated grit chambers, vortex grit chambers. Some of them are manually clean. Some of them, they are. So you just want, 1 foot per second when you're settling these things out, when the grit settles out, because you want it to settle. You want all that stuff to settle to the bottom and then get removed so it can go to a landfill or whatever to be disposed of. And you have that as a part of your preliminary treatment. And then, then we have, different types of flow measuring of preliminary treatment, and some things that's called a partial flume and then you have weirs. These things are good because you need to monitor what you're bringing into the treatment facility, so you can see how important it is to measure the flow and how it's going, because that gives you a snapshot of what it is coming in the plant. But the main thing we got to realize and recognize is that in the preliminary treatment process, this is one of the most dangerous processes there is, because there's a lot of things that's important when it's coming to different types of gases and hazards and everything. So one of the main gases that is emitted during preliminary treatment is hydrogen sulfide, or H2S, and it is very, very dangerous. It will kill you at very, very high concentration. So hydrogen sulfide, I've said it in different podcasts, but what it is that hydrogen sulfide, when you first smell it, it smells like a rotten egg odor smell, and that smell will only last for a little while. And then after that smell after your nose has been desensitized to it and you can't smell it anymore, then that's when it becomes dangerous, because even a very, very low concentration of it after your smell has been stripped, it can kill you. So these are the gases that are very important when you're dealing with different types of the organics and the inorganics, and the smell of hydrogen sulfide, it can knock you on your heels. And other things that we have to note when it comes to preliminary treatment is the hazards of moving equipment, which is, like I said, comminutors, bar maneuters. You never want to you want those things to be locked out and tagged out, or any kind of bar screen, anything that's mechanically energized. You want those things to be locked out and tagged out when you're doing maintenance on them, because you don't want to get hurt, and you don't want to possibly even lose your life because of these things. So you got to be very, very careful with all of that. And then it's also confined spaces when dealing with preliminary treatment. Some of these places and different types of things have confined space requirements, and the toxic gases and everything. You have to treat everything with respect, because it is very, very dangerous, and you don't want to lose your life. And you got to be smart about things, and that's dealing with preliminary treatment. So a lot of people, they think just because it's just a few racks and screens and different kind of things that they can relax, but really, anything in a treatment plant, you shouldn't be able to have a very nonchalant attitude about it, but you should be very, very aware of your surroundings and aware of what you're doing, because it's very, very important when dealing with these different types of conditions. The PPE is required. Always wear your safety glasses, or wear different types of gloves and different types of things, because you got to think about it all of the diseases and all of the bacteria and all this other stuff that's in the wastewater. Yes, it can get you sick, and these things, you can get contact with these things. So you have to wear your gloves, and you have to wear your steel-toe boots, and slip hazards, to be careful, because you can slip and fall and hurt yourself, and all those things. So you got to be aware of those things and know these things. So I want to talk about different types of different types of questions, and just to see if you can remember any of these questions when it comes to preliminary treatment. And I just want to ask you a couple questions and see if you can get them. So, as you remembered in the earlier, the ideal grip velocity is what? What is the ideal grip velocity? And that is 1 foot per second. So 1 foot per second is the ideal grit velocity. You don't want it to be any higher than that, or the grit won't settle. And you don't want it to be slower than that, because then organics will settle, and you want organics to be treated in the secondary treatment process. What removes debris? That will be screens. So a screen, or a bar rack, but it really is screens. Any type of screening is going to remove the debris. When it's coming through the collection system, it comes to the plant, these screens catch it, it gets removed, and then the incoming wastewater can continue to go through the different processes that it needs to go to. What is grit? What is grit? And if you remember from earlier, grit is inorganic material. And inorganic material is anything like coffee grounds and rocks, different types of things like that. Coffee grounds, rocks, sand, cinders. Non-protrusible organic or inorganic material, anything like that. That's what grit is. And those things will clog up pumps, or they will wear down pumps, and they will clog up pipes. And it's very, very important to get that grit settled out, or it's going to create problems for you in the rest of the plant. Here's a math one. What is 1 cubic feet per second? What is 1 cubic feet per second equivalent to? And it's equivalent to 646,000 gallons per day. I think I might have skipped something on here, but I don't know. Let me see. No, I didn't. But anyway, this is just a short, almost 30-minute podcast on preliminary treatment. It's very, very important to understand that some of these things, especially, like I said, the 1 foot per second for the grit, you're going to have to know that on your exam. You're going to have to know the different types of screens, bar screen, bar rack. You're going to have to know about maybe a partial flume, or your weirs of flow measurement. You're going to have to know the safety precautions of, different types of toxic gases. You're going to have to know about that. You're going to have to know about PPE, what to do around certain types of things, lockout, tag out. You're going to have to know these things, because they could ask you at any given time of these types of things regarding preliminary treatment. So, there's always good resources out there. Sean Powell with the Wastewater Enthusiast on the YouTube, on his YouTube channel. You could look him up. Him and also Matt Scroggins, Operator Mindset. They both have great channels that deal with wastewater treatment and different learning things that they teach on it. So I would recommend you to look at that during your studies. Also, if there's anything that you would like to know or want me to cover, or have a question, you can email me at h2ohustle.man@gmail.com. And I can answer your questions. Also, look me up on YouTube at H2O Hustle, and where I have these podcasts, or on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts, and just to continue to help you along and furthering your studies. But like I said, I'm going to start a series, and this is a preliminary treatment. So the next one I'm going to do is primary treatment, and do a study session on that. and to continue on and keep you driving on as much as you can. So hope you have a great, wonderful day, and catch you on the flip side.